Next, we have Sunita Abraham, our colleague here at Lancaster. And I think you have slides, don't you, Sunita?
Yeah. Hi. Can everyone
Uh,
hear me?
yes, we
Great.
can hear you.
I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see that.
Yes, that's it there now.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Great.
Perfect.
Well, yes, I was just thinking, Joel, you did such an amazing job. It was just fantastic to go right through till the end and be so calm. So well done on that. Thank you. I'm going to be speaking about somebody called Audre Lorde. And you might have heard of her. And I've called it the title Poet Warrior because in many ways she represents to me somebody who was so eloquent and so amazing with her words in terms of being an inspiration. But at every stage, she was resisting, rebelling, and transgressing. And so she was, in many ways, to me, a warrior. So Audre Lorde was born in 1934 and died in 1992. She is a self-described Black lesbian mother, warrior, poet, and she's somebody who dedicated both her life and her creative talent to confronting and addressing what Joel just talked about, these intersecting identities, the injustices that come when you have racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia all intersecting with each other. And before she passed away, she took on the name Gamba Adisa, which is she did that in an African naming ceremony, and it means warrior, she who makes her meaning known. So I thought it would be fit to kind of have this session about her. And before I continue, I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about what my own background is. I'm a lecturer in something called decolonization, which is basically looking at legacies of slavery, colonialism, and empire. And I'm teaching in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, but I also support people across the university who want to know a little bit more about this, both staff and students. I myself come from India and was born and brought up there. I guess in a sense, I have my own experience as being a woman and a woman of color here in a British context that have in many ways enabled me to understand better the various intersecting identities and marginalization that people from my part of the world experience, but also those from other parts of the world. So Audre Lorde herself is of Caribbean heritage from the island of Grenada, but her parents emigrated to the United States. And she was right from a very young age, very gifted in terms of her ability to put into words her feelings. And she says very from early on that she used poetry as a channel to express her feelings. After graduating, she became a librarian in New York City public schools from 1961 to 1968. And then she began publishing her poetry and also took part in various protests, anti-war, and women's liberation movements. And her first volume of poems is titled The First Cities, and it was published in 1968. I'm talking about some of this background because I just wanted to highlight how she came from an everyday background and she did an everyday job. And yet, in and through that, she was able to carve out the space to enable her to express her understanding of what she could see around her was happening in the context of America at that time, but also her own response to that, particularly as she was expressing her identity as being a lesbian. She discovered her love for teaching when working in a historically Black college in Missouri in America. So, in many ways, people would class Audre Lorde as a Black feminist. Her work drew on her African American identity, and it incorporated themes of racial and social justice and queer sexuality. And these themes were explored in more detail in her subsequent writings. Cables to Rage, you can see just by the title of it, even if you've never read anything, what it could potentially be meaning, and that a very clear element of calling out and speaking out. And the second one was From a Land Where People Live. And her work increasingly focused on the intersection of these multiple identities of race, gender, class, and sexuality. She wrote a series of a collection called The Black Unicorn after a visit to the African continent, to a place called Benin. And it was the inspiration there. And it drew on these themes of spirituality in the context of African goddesses. And what I particularly wanted to take away from that is how her poetry highlighted the importance of speaking up. So in The Black Unicorn, she says, "When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we're still afraid. So it's better to speak." I sometimes want to kind of highlight that with students in class when they're unsure about sharing a point of view, that it's really important to be able to know that there are safe spaces where you can be able to voice your opinion. But at times, even when the space isn't safe, it's important to speak up. Another important thing about Audre Lorde that I admire is how she highlighted the importance of these intersecting identities being different, but also that within these identities you might have differences, but that you should be able to respect those differences. So in particular, she was asking white women to acknowledge the oppression of women. As she says, the oppression of women knows no ethnic nor racial boundaries. She agrees that that is the case, that it knows no ethnic nor racial boundaries. True, but that does not mean it is identical within those differences. So here, very much like how Sunil was talking about, how and Joel were talking about various forms of respecting differences, but also respecting the fact that you have multiple identities. Here she is saying that being a white woman is a different experience to being a Black woman, and acknowledging that is important, and then respecting the fact that you have different experiences as a result of that is important too. So the most famous, I guess in a sense, essay that people hear of is from a collection called Sister Outsider, Essays and Speeches. And I just wanted to kind of highlight the context in which she's written that particular piece. She was invited to an academic conference where there was only one panel with a Black feminist or lesbian person and only 2 Black women presenters. So in response, she penned this her thoughts in the 1984 collection Sister Outsider. And she asked, what does it mean when tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? And she then responds to that, and she says the only way that could happen is that it means that only the most narrow perimeters of change are possible and allowable. So if you only invite that many people to come for a conference like this, the opportunity for any other point of view is very limited. So you need to actually be more inclusive if you are going to actually dismantle, as she said, the master's house. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. This is the praise that's most associated, one of the most associated phrases with Audre Lorde. And basically, she's highlighting that by just being the sole person there representing particular position, it's an intellectual and emotional labor to challenge those that oppression, but also your identity seems to be almost limited to that of being the marginalized person and not of being a person. So she called on feminists to acknowledge the many differences among women and to utilize them as a source of power rather than one of division. So as Roxane Gray argues, there is, for example, a strain of feminism that believes that if only women act like men, we will achieve the equality we seek. But Lorde asks us to do the more difficult and radical work of imagining what our realities might look like if masculinity were not the ideal to which we aspire. So we are not aspiring to be like men. Heterosexuality were not the ideal to which we aspire, and if whiteness were not the ideal to which we aspire. Recognizing that is important. So I end with a quote from her work, Sister Outsider, which is particularly pertinent at this time, particularly with what is happening in the Middle East. And her work was very much to talk about the present and to be able to stand up and speak out. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. A fabulous quote to end on. In fact, some really inspiring quotes there. And you've introduced me to someone I now must go and read.